5:30. Taranaki has a higher level of hazardous drinking than the national average. And Prof Connor recently published a report demonstrating there are around 250 alcohol-related cancer deaths a year in New Zealand, and about 60% of these deaths in women are due to breast cancer. So, I mean, while we argue about cannabis, I slipped this in because, it's a day in which they're side by side, aren't they? We cheerfully promulgate the consumption of booze, don't we? Especially wine, don't we?
Well, they're legal. I mean, the difference between that is that alcohol is legal and cannabis is not.
Yeah.
But the simple reality is we know categorically that both are terrible for you if you're too young and your brain is still forming, and they're also not terribly good for you if you overconsume either.
Yeah.
So everything's about moderation. I mean, a glass of wine a day, a bottle of beer a day, I don't think is going to do anyone much harm and probably going to extend your happiness. I'm sure you'd agree with me on that one, Neil. But anything in excess...
I may have to declare a conflict of interest here.
Anything in excess is, in that area is going to be terrible for your health.
Yeah, I mean, but that is the definition of excess. I mean, too much water will kill you, you'll drown. But if you don't drink water, you'll die. So, yeah, there are a few issues. I mean, one of the things, without getting too far into the science, which I think is, you've well established. One of the things that I've noticed as a beer writer is that in the media, I mean, we were talking about, we demonise alcohol, but actually, in a lot of cases, it's glorified in a lot of our culture. And so what I've noticed is if there's a story about the alcohol harm, and it doesn't matter, it's units of alcohol, it's not what people are drinking, there's always pictures of boys drinking beer. And if there's an article about the health benefits of alcohol, it's glamorous women drinking red wine. And that's always the photo that's chosen, even if the story doesn't mention a particular type of alcohol. It's just the kind of way we've got it, that we do sort of, we look at the Italians and the French and they drink lots of wine and they're really healthy and they're really skinny. And we wonder why that doesn't work in Taranaki. So, yeah, it's an interesting way that we sort of choose to depict alcohol in media. And it happens all the time.
It's one of the reasons for the uneasiness of this dichotomy that you're describing, that in fact if alcohol were invented now, as people are fond of saying, we'd be having the same argument about legalisation as we do with cannabis.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, yeah.
Same would be sugar. If sugar were invented tomorrow, it would be illegal.
Yeah, that's another good point.
And don't even get me started on energy drinks. Those things are just terrifying,
We saw this on Stuff today, the survey showing that drinking from refillable water bottles can be as bad as licking a toilet seat. Researchers tested 4 types of water bottles: straw top, squeeze top, slide top, screw top. The slide top, is that the one when you pull up the top? Mm-hmm. Okay. Was the worst, containing more than 900,000 colony-forming units per square centimetre. That sounds awful, isn't it?
It does sound awful.
Do you agree with all the commenters underneath the story who say we are paranoid now about germs?
Well, I've always known that you should clean your bottle well before refilling it. I mean, the whole notion of a plastic bottle is so recent in human existence. These things didn't exist 30 years ago, and now they're endemic. So we've all known, we teach our kids, if you're going to use it tomorrow, and we want you to keep on using it until it cracks, because otherwise you just add to the mountain of plastic. You've got to be clean with it. So, if it was a clean toilet seat, I'm sure you can lick it.
I suppose you could. It wouldn't be a very edifying sight. Sorry, Neil, you?
No, I've really got nothing much to add to that. I mean, this reminded me of, I don't know a lot about science, but most of it I learned from Mythbusters. And they did a study about, should you have your toothbrush close to the toilet? Is it going to sort of pick up germs? And,
that's right.
And their conclusion was basically no. It's pretty much the same throughout the house. So, yeah, it was an attention-grabbing headline, but I think, everyone knows that if you don't wash the bottle that you drink out, same if you don't wash your coffee cup, it's going to eventually turn a little south.
I know that in Havelock North it is paid to be very careful about a very serious problem, but an unrelated one, really, in recent days. But, I mean, generally, have we gone overboard about germs, though?
I think maybe there's something to do with what's going on in the world, and if things are very quiet, then these stories get far more prominence than they probably should.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ella Henry, thank you for an interesting time, as always, on the panel. Very nice to see you again. And Neil Miller, thanks too.
Always a pleasure.
Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up. Thanks, everybody.
Kia ora everyone, I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of our excellent team, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tō te maira I hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight, two Hawke's Bay councillors say the buck stops with the council after Campylobacter in Havelock North's water supply makes thousands of people sick. Mayor Lawrence Yule joins us live. Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt roars into the Olympic history books in Rio. What a remarkable effort. Helen Kelly on legalising medicinal cannabis and what she's taking in the absence of a legal option. The Auckland Council signs off on that unitary plan, and kayaker Lisa Carrington on the eve of her quest for a golden double. All of that and more coming up on Checkpoint tonight, but we begin with Sharon Brett-Kelly this evening and RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. Many Havelock North people are questioning why they weren't told earlier that their tap water was contaminated. Thousands of people have fallen sick after the town's water supply was infected with Campylobacter bacteria, but the cause is not yet known. The town's schools will be closed for the next 2 days. Most people RNZ News spoke to on the streets of Havelock North were furious they weren't told earlier.
My little baby, she was quite sick over the weekend, and it's a real concern as a parent as to why we weren't communicated with the information earlier.
We should have been told early, and apparently they knew earlier than we've been told.
I think the council has been very remiss about not advising the population earlier.
Hastings District Mayor Lawrence Yule says he was told about the contamination about 3:30 on Friday afternoon, and it was then a decision was made to chlorinate the water. He says about 5 hours earlier there was a suspicious test, but the council had to make sure before it chlorinated the water. Legislation giving the country's spy agencies an explicit mandate to spy on New Zealanders has been introduced in Parliament. The proposed bill would govern both the Government Communications Security Bureau and the Security Intelligence Service. An independent review earlier this year found the restrictions preventing the GCSB from intercepting the private communications of New Zealanders was confusing. The Prime Minister John Campbell, who made the announcement this afternoon, says the bill would be the biggest overhaul of the agency's legislation.
This includes a new triple lock system which will apply to any warrant involving a New Zealander. It means the Attorney General and the Commissioner of Security Warrants will have to approve any such warrant, which will then be subject to a review by the Inspector General.
John Campbell says there would be more cooperation between the GCSB and SIS. The bill will have its first reading in Parliament on Thursday. The Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt has made history by winning 3 consecutive Olympic gold medals in the 100 metres after storming to victory in Rio. Bolt has now won a total of 7 gold medals spanning 3 Olympics. He beat out his arch rival, the American Justin Gatlin. Here's how Sky Sport called the race. The victory also takes Usain Bolt a step closer to his goal of winning a historic triple-triple combination of gold in the 100, 200 and 4x100 metres relay in 3 consecutive Olympics. The real estate company Colliers International suggested the government house homeless people in tents and warehouses in an urgent report to the Ministry of Social Development. Checkpoint has obtained the report commissioned by the Ministry in June, which was completed in under a week. Colliers was paid to find 100 emergency housing places for single people and small families to stay in over winter. The places had to be ready within a month and suitable for up to 6 months. Colliers' preferred solution was pre-purchasing motel rooms in bulk at a cost of $1.6 million over 6 months. The ministry rejected the idea of housing people in tents and warehouses. One of Auckland's biggest debates has come to an end with the finalising of the city's development blueprint, the unitary plan. Councillors have wound up 4 days of working through the final version of the plan, which provides for much higher density housing to accommodate population growth of up to 1 million by 2040. The Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse has led the process for nearly 5 years and says while the plan isn't perfect, it will enable the building of homes that are more affordable.
It's certainly going to deliver an awful lot more houses than you could have built, before the plan was finalised. The other thing is it allows for terraced housing for apartments and for different kinds of houses, and they're simply going to be more affordable than the standalone houses we've got now.
Auckland's Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse. To sport now, and the New Zealand men's hockey team has been knocked out of the Olympics in devastating fashion, losing 3-2 to Germany in their quarter-final. The Black Sticks men were leading 2-0 heading into the final quarter, but Germany scored 3 goals in the final 5 minutes to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Veteran midfielder Ryan Archibald says the team is devastated. Ryan Archibald, the Black Sticks women face Australia in their quarter-final at 1 o'clock tomorrow morning. The New Zealand sailor Sam Meach will race for a medal in the men's laser class tomorrow morning. Meach heads into the medal contest in 3rd place and must finish in at least 5th place to get on the podium. Meanwhile, New Zealand's champion kayaker Lisa Carrington begins her Olympic campaign overnight and says she's taking inspiration from the feats of rowers Hamish Bond and Eric Murray. Like the double gold medalist, Carrington starts in Rio as a defending Olympic champion and with a similar long unbeaten record. Carrington says Bond and Murray have set the standard for other New Zealand athletes.
It's great to see that they are so strong and getting that inspiration that, I guess that being a New Zealander as well, it's nice to know that something that what they do is achievable for us all.
Lisa Carrington will compete in the K1 200 heats shortly after midnight tonight, with the K1 500 competition starting later in the week. And that's the news.
Support for cannabis.
I think politicians have seen historically that cannabis is a poison chalice.
Helen Kelly's pain relief.
The cannabis experience that I'm having controlling my pain has been quite sensational. People need to have a think about what they're denying, people like me.
And it's a no from the top.
I think if we as Parliament were to decriminalise, then one of the messages we'd be sending is that increased drug use is okay.
Cannabis Conundrum, Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how tourism in Thailand is fuelling the cruel treatment of tigers. And after 10, David Bowie's biographer, the veteran arts commentator and rock journalist Paul Morley. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday in Northland, cloudy periods, a few showers north of Whangarei, becoming isolated and confined to the east coast overnight. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine apart from a few cloudy periods. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with a few showers developing north of Wairoa. Wellington and Wairarapa, cloud increasing tonight with the odd shower possible. Cloud clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Nelson mainly fine, however rain in the west clearing tonight. Buller to Fiordland, remaining areas of rain clearing this evening or overnight and becoming fine everywhere. Drizzle developing in Fiordland around midday tomorrow. Marlborough to Otago, but excluding Clutha, fine weather. Southland and Clutha, cloudy periods with a few showers today. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, isolated showers, clearing tomorrow morning. And you're with Checkpoint and it's 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks very much, Sharon. We begin tonight in Havelock North and a growing area around it where Campylobacter in the town's water supply has made hundreds of people sick and possibly many more. This is now a major public health issue with the town's 8 schools closed, people being hospitalised and some people becoming seriously ill. Whilst this hasn't been absolutely confirmed, it appears to be from faecal contamination in the town's water supply. The Hastings District Mayor Lawrence Yule will join us live in a moment, but first let's hear from Wayne Bradshaw, who is a Hastings District Councillor and Age Concern board member. He said Havelock North's water supply was contaminated with E. coli after heavy rain last October. And after similarly heavy rain a week and a half ago, the council should have been alert to the very real possibility of another contamination. Instead, they didn't do daily tests, and when it became apparent contamination had probably occurred, they were too slow to inform people of the risks. I asked Wayne Bradshaw why the council appears to have been so caught out.
For the life of me, I'm not sure. They knew about it midday on Friday. It didn't get out into the arena until 7 o'clock, and that was only through press release. Not everyone has computers. Not everyone looks at computers at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. They didn't ring up the rest homes as they should have. If they'd responded sooner at, say, 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they could have rung the rest homes, could have rung the schools, could have rung the childcare centres and said, look, we've got a problem here, we need to get on top of it, and everyone needs to know about it.
You are a board member of Age Concern. What has been the impact on the elderly people that you know of or have heard about that have become sick?
Well, I got a text from a lady the other day who's got 2 elderly parents, and she said on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was looking after my elderly parents. They were sick, vomiting, diarrhoea, rang up the hospital. The hospital told me to give them lots of water to keep them hydrated. And now they're in hospital in a serious condition. That's one example. I'm sure there's many, many others. But the whole issue here is we know the elderly and the young and the people with chronic illness are the most vulnerable people.
So, Wayne, this appears to be waterborne.
Yes.
People were drinking, it seems, contaminated water, yes, and they were being told to drink more of the water that was contaminated.
That would appear to be the case, certainly is, yes. And if the tests had been done as regularly as prudence would have, we would have found this out a heck of a lot sooner, and we would have saved a whole lot of concern and a whole lot of time and effort, and people would have been in a far better state of mind. Now, this bug could keep going for another week or so.
Where does the buck stop for this?
Well, ultimately, the water is provided. The ratepayers are charged for the water on their rates. The water is provided by the council, and it's in council infrastructure. One would have to say the council has a majority of responsibility. You could also say the DHB is meant to be there to act as a guardian for the health concerns of the district. I'd say between the two of them, they've got a lot to account for.
The Health Minister, Dr. Jonathan Coleman, who's also Sports Minister, of course, is at the Olympics in Rio, but Peter Dunn is the Associate Minister of Health, and I asked him to assess the scale of the problem.
On the face of it, when you look at some of the numbers coming through, it's got huge risk potentials, particularly since we may not know for up to 10 days what the level of infection is because of the nature of the particular bacteria and the way it incubates. So I think it's highly likely we're going to see more cases, and this is obviously of extreme concern. And the next issue is then determining where the actual location of the cause is, so that that can be addressed. But that's something that the District Council and the DHB in Hawke's Bay are working on pretty dramatically at the moment.
Minister, on the face of it, there is faecal contamination of a municipal water supply in New Zealand, making hundreds of people very unwell. There is no way that is anywhere near good enough, is there?
No, it's not. And the issue, as I say, is to determine where the cause of that contamination, where the focal point of that contamination is, and to address it. In the meantime, there are the cases that are in hospital. I think as of yesterday afternoon, some 400 cases had been reported, 50-odd had been seen by the hospital, 12 have been admitted, 2 are in critical care, etc. These are big numbers. They are of major concern. And we've got to get to the, if you excuse the pun, the bottom of this as quickly as possible, so that we can start to prevent a more serious outbreak. It's pretty horrific at the moment. I think it's unfortunate, but we're working as closely as we can with the DHB and the council to resolve it.
You used the phrase as quickly as possible. Surely they were too slow off the mark in terms of warnings around boiling water and protecting yourself against the contamination.
Well, there's going to be an investigation by the council which we'll cooperate with once this emergency is over, and that will look at the adequacy of response and those sorts of things. My information is that as recently as last Tuesday, so just under a week ago, there was no problems indicated through routine monitoring. It first started to become apparent on Thursday, Friday of last week. So again, given that this particular bacteria can have up to a 10-day incubation period, it could well be that we've got more cases to come to light. And I think that's where the focus has got to be over the next few days, and making sure that those people are made well again and that the source of the contamination is determined so that it can be rectified.
Right, what of the people who are sick? Well, Adrian Pearce is a Hastings District Councillor and mayoral candidate, we should put out. She says the Hawke's Bay District Council has been too slow to act. This afternoon she went to visit a mother whose son has been seriously unwell for the best part of a week now. I asked Adrian when she believes the council should have made the public aware this was an escalating public health emergency.
My take is, some people are talking Wednesday, I'm not sure about that, but definitely lunchtime-ish Friday.
And so why didn't that happen? Do you understand why a warning didn't go out then?
No.
It should have. The information was available and something should have happened.
It's really, John, 101, just to say, we think we have a problem, we're not sure, please boil water. Please don't drink water from the tap or use bottled water. We're not sure. We're looking into it. That's it. That's from my point of view. I really think it was around the complexity maybe of how they wondered how to let people know. But social media has just kind of taken over, I guess.
So there's Facebook, there's local radio stations, there's a really good local newspaper. Your feeling is there was plenty of ways to get the message out much earlier than it went out?
Yes, texting, your dentist, your hairdresser can text you. So we've got a database of ratepayers. We must have some mobile phone numbers, text, or good old-fashioned fill a room up with a team of people and phone hospitality businesses, that you have numbers of people. Yep. Phone people, say we've got a problem.
You are there with Kayla. Why are you there, Adrian? Why have you gone to see Kayla?
Kayla's kind of story about her upsetness with the, how ill her son has been. Then we kind of messaged each other, single mum, working hard, son ill, spent a lot of money on chemists and things. So my question was to her on Messenger, so what does this mean? Holiday pay or anything like that? But no, she doesn't have anything like that. So I've actually come with some groceries.
Out of your own pocket?
Yeah, well, I've got enough to spare. So, and she was so lovely. She met me at my vehicle and she burst into tears, and it's just a terrible thing. I don't know, there must be lots of other people that've got, it's a financial, it's fine to say buy water, go to your chemist, get this, get that. I mean, if you live from kind of payday to payday or whatever, I mean, how do you pay for it?
The electrolyte alone is about $17 without prescription.
Electrolyte, $17 without prescription.
Kayla, can I bring you in here? So when did your boy, how old is he and when did he get sick?
My son is 7 and he started getting sick Monday night, early hours, Tuesday morning.
And how sick has he been?
Well, we started with a headache, vomiting, fever. Fever has got worse and worse and worse. We finally stopped vomiting, stopped with the headache, stopped with the fever, and now we've had non-stop diarrhoea that has got to the point where I've had to actually throw household stuff out. My washing machine has been non-stop. hand sanitizers, you name it, I've had to do it. And he's missing out on school. I can't go to work. You know, there's all these other things that are taking place because I feel that the right protocols weren't taken.
So Kayla, forgive me, if you don't go to work, do you get paid?
No, I don't.
Right, so you're on some kind of casual contract?
No, I've only just recently started working.
Right, so you are out of pocket, plus you have the extra expenses of having a very sick child.
Yep, I've actually had to, unfortunately, and embarrassing enough for my son, I've had to put him in nappies because we have been running out of washing. So we're just continually just trying to do what we can.
And so how helpful would it have been for you for somebody to tell you, boil your water?
It would have made my life a lot easier, but by the time that they had actually told everybody was sick already.
Kayla, in terms of your son's school community, in terms of the people you know, are other people as sick as your boy is?
Yep, there was an email sent out on Friday. There was 102 children away from school just Friday alone. The school has decided today that they're actually going to close the school for 2 days because there are too many children that are off sick as well as staff members.
Kayla Vivian, a mother whose 7-year-old son has, as you heard, been terribly unwell. We're joined on the phone now by Hastings District Mayor Lawrence Yule. Mayor Yule, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
People feel let down and people feel angry. Is that a legitimate response to what's happened?
Well, I think there's a variety of responses, but this is the largest single incident that ever happened in Hastings. It's the largest waterborne disease outbreak in New Zealand's history, as I'm told. And between 1,000 and 2,000 people have been really badly affected. So I've had Campylobacter myself previously. I know how bad it is, and members of my family have got it now. So it is everywhere, and it is, a crisis. We're managing it, but it is having severe implications on families, young ones, old ones, and just normal people. So there is a mixed group of emotions. We are doing what we can to manage those and support our communities. And including this afternoon, we announced a fund to support hardship where people can ring the council, and we will see what we can do to help them if they are in need of financial support. OK, can I just clarify those numbers? You now believe there is between 1,000 and 2,000 people who have been made unwell because of this? That's correct. The DHB chief executive this afternoon said that at a media conference, so I'm quoting him.
OK, and let's talk about the source. You do believe it's faecal contamination of that one particular boar?
We will get the final result of what's in the water tomorrow. Well, an indicative result, should I say, because nothing's ever final. And what people don't understand is most of these bugs have to be grown. So if you find something of an indication, you then have to grow the bugs to see actually whether there's enough of them and whether they are the bug you think it is.
OK, but given the pervasiveness of it, given the number of people infected, this is not somebody who hasn't washed their hands, is it?
No.
OK, so Wayne Bradshaw
disease.
said to us earlier in the program, and I don't think you heard him, that there was an E. coli outbreak in the same boar in October of last year after heavy rain. There was similarly heavy rain a week and a half ago, and the council and its officers should have been more alert to the possibility of exactly this kind of contamination.
OK. So there was an E. coli outbreak at Boar 3 in the field of 3 boars. And it was a low level, nobody got sick, but we treated the water with chlorine as a precaution. Following that, we've closed that boar. It's never been used since and wasn't operating as part of last week's event. The other 2 boars in that field have been there for 35 years. They have never once tested positive.
Although, OK, hold on a sec. Farming's changed in that area, hasn't it? You and I both know that there's been intensification throughout that area. In fact, quite a change in the demographic, the animal demographic around there. Is it now more likely that faecal contamination is going to occur after heavy rainfall?
We don't know that yet. Clearly, what we know is the boars 1 and 2 they have E. coli in there, which indicates contamination. Tomorrow we should know whether that contamination is Campylobacter or not. If that's the case, it clearly shows that boar water is contaminated. We're also doing other tests around all the surrounding area to say, is the aquifer contaminated? because all the tests we've done up until now say that this water is 50 years old. It's secure, it's clean, so we cannot yet explain what is the level of or how this contamination has occurred.
Okay, so you're waiting to find out where it's from. Did you take too long to raise the red flag last week? Could you have gone to people earlier and said, look, we're not 100% certain, but boil your water for the time being?
We did. So I know there's criticism about the timeframes, but it's important I go through this. On Tuesday, we conducted a test. All these tests take 48 hours to get a confirmed result. On Tuesday, we conducted a test. It was confirmed that the water was clear in Havelock North. On Thursday, we conducted a test, and as part of these 48-hour tests, they give you an indication at 24 hours. On Friday morning, from the Thursday's test, there was indication that something was abnormal in the water. We notified the DHB, who then rang round all the schools in Hawke's Bay to see whether there was any area of sickness. It was clearly shown that there was a number of children unwell in Havelock North, which is where the bore is. So a decision was made at 3 o'clock. Let's chlorinate the water, not wait till the following day, which was normal practice, on the basis that something is going on here. They then decided at 5:30, as a further precaution, because we don't know what's going on here and we didn't know what the cause was, that we should issue a boiling notice. And we did that. They made the decision about 5:30, and the decision was sort of publicised from 6 o'clock onwards on Friday evening.
In hindsight, was it a mistake to go from Tuesday to Thursday between tests? Should you have, particularly in the context of what you know about E. coli in the same area last October after heavy rainfall, tested again on Wednesday?
No, because we had never had any E. coli present in the other two remaining bores, we figured they were absolutely fine. And we carried on the drinking water standard tests, which is every 2 days. That's what we've done. If, in fact, we thought we were using bore 3, which might have had a history, then we might have done something different.
Okay,
we believe we'd isolated the source.
Do you believe now that it is highly probable the municipal water supply is responsible for this?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so what do you do to make good to the people who are paying for the water, which has made them so unwell, and who are now in desperate straits? They're having to take days off work. In some cases, they're not being paid for that. They've got very sick children. There are very sick elderly people. What does the council do to make good?
Well, first of all, as the Mayor, I apologise to the people of Havelock North for what has happened. I lead the organisation that delivers them drinking water. They expect it to be safe, and clearly it hasn't been. So that's the first step. Secondly, we are going to do a major investigation to get to the bottom of what caused this, because it can never happen again. And we need to make sure that processes, systems are in place to make sure of that. So far, we cannot find any human or technical fault that has been attributed to this incident. Thirdly, we have started looking at how we can help welfare with people. So we've looked at that today. We'll likely look at how we deal with compensation for business losses, etc., later this week. But at the moment, our focus is simply about understanding what happened in terms of what is the bug, making sure that people are safe and people aren't getting further sick, and we're absolutely confident of that now. The treatment of the water, the boiling of the water, means that the water is safe to drink. So we've removed further risk. And if we can find that it is just Campylobacter in the water, then actually we'll be able to remove the boiling notice and people will pretty much be able to get back to normal.
Lawrence Ewell, Hastings District Mayor, thank you for joining us live on the program this evening. It's 28 minutes past 5. Legislation giving New Zealand spy agencies an explicit mandate to spy on New Zealanders and bringing the two intelligence agencies into one regime. Of course, the SAS and the GCSB has been introduced to Parliament. A review earlier this year determined the two agencies should be operating under the same legislation and the same rules. The New Zealand Intelligence and Security Bill will have its first reading in Parliament on Thursday. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, revealed the contents of the new bill at his post-cabinet briefing today.
A new single act to cover the agencies, replacing the 4 separate acts which currently exist. A new warranting framework for intelligence collection. This includes a new triple lock system which will apply to any warrant involving a New Zealander. It means the Attorney General and the Commissioner of Security Warrants will have to approve any such warrant, which will then be subject to a review by the Inspector General. The bill also proposes more cooperation between the New Zealand SIS and GCSB.
The Minister responsible for the agencies, Chris Finlayson, says any warrant to spy on a New Zealander would have to be necessary and proportionate and subject to high scrutiny.
The GCSB has always been able to target New Zealanders for its cyber assurance and its assistance functions. Replacing Section 14 with the new triple lock protection for New Zealanders is both more coherent and a more robust safeguard for New Zealanders.
Chris Finlayson, our political editor Jane Patterson, was at the briefing today and joins us now from our parliamentary office. Hi Jane, all bets are off then. The GCSB will now be free to spy on New Zealanders.
That's right, John, and of course this has been one of the more controversial aspects of the law reform as this whole process has gone through. The review carried out by Michael Cullen and Patsy Reddy found that the GCSB was in some ways hindered by this inability in some cases to spy on New Zealanders, and they used the example of people being lost at sea and they couldn't use electronic communications to track those people down or help them. So now GCSB and SIS will have the same powers to carry out surveillance with the oversight, as Mr Key alluded to, of the triple lock. So it has to go through the Attorney General, it has to go through the Commissioner of Intelligence warrants, and the Inspector General of Security and Intelligence will also review each of those Tier 1 warrants, so the highest level of warrant. And it also has to be in the interests of national security, and that's defined in the bill. And I think this is where a lot of the political wrangling is going to come down to in terms of that definition, which is very broad at the moment. The government has noted that it has been criticised as being too broad, and it has actually presented an alternative to that definition if the bill is not going to get through with good political support with the existing definition.
So spying will take place. There will also be information sharing, allowing other agencies to access personal information. So sharing amongst agencies. What's happening in that area and what are the safeguards there?
Well, actually, at the moment, the two spy agencies pretty much have what's been described as open slather to New Zealanders' personal information. They can go to banks, they can go to government departments, and they can request that information not under a warrant, not notify anybody, and that's all existed under an exemption to the Privacy Act. So this is really being tidied up under this bill. They are given the explicit mandate to go and ask for that information, but they will now have to abide by the principles of the Privacy Act, and they are a lot broader and they're a lot tougher than they would operate under that exemption. The Attorney General, Chris Finlayson, also said that if the SIS or GCSB is requesting information such as tax information, highly sensitive, that would involve ministerial approval.
Jane, a new whistleblowing offence created under this legislation. Can you tell us about that?
And of course we've had the likes of Edward Snowden with disclosures and causing all sorts of problems for governments around the world. So this bill makes it very explicit that any whistleblowing activity from either of the two intelligence agencies has to go to Cheryl Gwynne, the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. They can't go to the media, they can't go elsewhere, it has to go through her. And a new offence has been created. It carries 2 years in jail and up to a $10,000 fine, and that is for anybody with a government security clearance or access to classified information, communicating, retaining or copying it. And the Attorney General, Chris Finlayson, said that's pretty broad, so that's really to cover any kind of leaking at all from those two agencies.
Jane, sorry, we're running over on everything tonight. What sort of political support does this bill have, very quickly?
Very quickly, much broader than the 2013 legislation. Labor will support it to select committee at this stage, so it has the numbers to get that far. There will be some digging much deeper to make sure that national security definition and some of the other checks and balances are tough enough.
Our political editor, Jane Patterson. Thanks so much, Jane. We appreciate it. Jane Patterson live from our parliamentary office. The Jamaican sprinter, Usain Bolt, has roared into Olympic history and confirmed his status as the fastest man in the world ever after storming to victory in the 100 metres final in Rio. He's now won a record 3 consecutive gold medals in the 100 metres. Of course, Bolt beat his arch rival, the American Justin Gatlin, who was roundly booed by the Rio crowd over his past doping offences. Here's how Sky Sport called the race that the world really stops to watch. Yeah, incredible. And the Bolt now has a total of 7 gold medals over 3 Olympic Games, Beijing, London, Rio. Outside the Olympic Stadium in Rio, fans watching on the big screen paid tribute to that remarkable achievement.
Bolt is just the king of just keeping you on the edge of your toes, but he is so confident. He's a man that just makes you just have your heart in your mouth, but you know he's going to pull through. Fantastic, just fantastic.
Yeah, congrats to Usain Bolt, congrats to Jamaica. Happy to be here. It's exciting. The three-peat, it's just the greatest news for Jamaica and for everybody.
We're here to celebrate and to be a part of what we call an experience like no other. You know, this is history being made, and Jamaica is a part of this history, and Bolt is making history for all of us.
This is his last Olympics, and he's done history, the three-peat of the 100 meters, and watch out for the 200 meters. I guarantee he's going to win that also.
Yes, absolutely incredible by Usain Bolt. We will have more on that later in the program. Coming up on a busy old checkpoint, why the real estate giant Colliers International suggested the government house homeless people in tents and warehouses, and more people than ever before are in favour of legalising or decriminalising, which is the salient point of that poll, cannabis. But first, Nona's here with business, but first, here's Sharon Brett Kelly with the 5:35 and a half headlines.
Thank you, John. The Acting Health Minister, Peter Dunn, says it could take days before the full level of gastro-infection in Havelock North is known, and it's highly likely there will be more cases. Thousands of people have fallen sick after the town's water supply was infected with Campylobacter bacteria, but the source of the infection is not yet known. Mr Dunn told Checkpoint it may not be known for 10 days what the level of infection is because of the nature of the particular bacteria and the way it incubates. Legislation giving the country's spy agencies an explicit mandate to spy on New Zealanders has been introduced to Parliament. The proposed bill would govern both the Government Communications Security Bureau and the Security Intelligence Service. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, who made the announcement this afternoon, says the bill would be the biggest overhaul of the agency's legislation. The real estate company Colliers International suggested the government house homeless people in tents and warehouses in an urgent report to the Ministry of Social Development. Checkpoint has obtained the report, commissioned by the Ministry in June. Colliers was paid to find 100 emergency housing places for single people and small families to stay in over winter. One of Auckland's biggest debates has come to an end with the finalising of the city's development blueprint, the Unitary Plan. Councillors have wound up 4 days of working through the final version of the plan, which provides for much higher density housing to accommodate population growth of up to 1 million by 2040. And the Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt has made history by winning 3 consecutive Olympic gold medals in the 100 metres after storming to victory in Rio. Bolt has now won a total of 7 gold medals spanning 3 Olympics. And that's the news. I'll be back at 6 o'clock with news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. Let's turn to business now with Nona Peltier. Welcome back, Nona. The power company Contact Energy reported a loss for the full year today.
Yeah, actually it was less than half what they made the year earlier, but that's because they
a smaller loss.
No, they had made a profit the year before.
Right.
So actually, let me see, that's a lot more than just
So
it's a much bigger number. Yeah, so it's $66 million loss for the year ended in June.
And last year?
$133 million profit.
They're down 200 million year on year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's quite a lot.
Yeah, it is.
But that's because they had to write off some things like power stations and so forth. Never mind that. The market liked the results, so the share price went up.
Right, so they're writing off the right things?
Yeah, they're writing off the right things,
out of the books.
And they're still very strong with their cash flow. They did return about $100 million to shareholders through a buyback of shares, and they're looking at, they're in pretty good condition. So the market went, yeah, okay, and plus they've been gaining some customers. Now that's really where the real competition is there between the big four. Now we don't know how the rest are done. We won't learn that till next week. But for now, Contact, the market liked that result, and it really was reflected overall. The dollar lost a little bit of ground through the day, 71.8 US cents, 93.8 Australian, 55.5 British pence. The New Zealand Top 50 Index, of course, just for you, rode to a record high today. Yes, indeed.
Oh,
there you go.
Constant record-breaking, isn't it?
I tell you what, it really very strong. In fact, we hit an intraday record and then eased back ever so slightly, still to end on a record high at 7,388, up 25 points, or 1/3%.
Nona Peltier, a business reporter based in Auckland and joining us in the studio. Thanks, Nona. The real estate giant Colliers International suggested the government house homeless people in tents and warehouses in an urgent report commissioned by the Ministry of Social Development. Checkpoint has obtained the full report Colliers provided to the ministry in June. The 29-page document was completed in under a week. Our reporter Alex Ashton has been looking at it.
The Minister of Social Housing, Paula Bennett, first referred to the report in a select committee in June.
We've been looking at should we almost pre-purchase in some motels. We've got a report that's just come in yesterday morning that we're looking at that if that just sort of gets us through particularly this winter period, and it's something we could do relatively quickly, being in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Checkpoint asked for the report under the Official Information Act. The request was denied, but the document has since been published online. Colliers had a week to come up with 100 placements in Auckland, half for singles and the other 50 spots for small families. They had to be ready within a month and viable for 3 to 6 months.
The preferred short-term procurement option is to rent rooms using negotiated bulk deals. This approach will achieve housing of suitable quality and design, scalability, avoids long-term commitments, and is likely to achieve reasonable value for money.
Colliers' report says most people stay in emergency housing for 12 weeks, but ideally people would be out in 6.
Other options that may be viable but are not commercially procurable and are already assumed to be exhausted are surplus housing from Housing New Zealand, housing held by the New Zealand Defence Force, and charitable offerings from marae and churches.
Other options, including enhanced tents and warehouses, were suggested but rejected by the ministry. Containers were given a maybe, but more than 3 months after it was produced. What came of the report's findings? Checkpoint asked the Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, for an interview. Her office referred RNZ to the Ministry of Social Development, so did Colliers International. But the ministry didn't respond to Checkpoint's request for comment. A social policy analyst with the Salvation Army, Alan Johnson, says bulk buying wouldn't work anyway because there aren't the properties there to buy. And he says it does seem like a last-second response.
It does point, however, to a degree of panic on the government's part that all of a sudden winter came up on them, and there's people living in cars and in tents and in shacks, and it's an issue they need an urgent response to, and which is disappointing, really.
The Labour MP, Carmel Sepulone, says the report was clearly scrambled together.
The report was completed on an urgent basis over a short time period, less than 1 week from the date of instruction. So clearly the government are scrambling over the emergency housing issue and giving an external contractor 1 week to pull together a report, which is incredibly important, seems a little bit flippant.
The report's preferred option was bulk buying motel rooms at a cost of $1.6 million for 6 months. Based on 100 placements, that works out at $16,000 per room. The ACT leader, David Seymour, says on paper the government has done the right thing, seeking private sector expertise to deal with an urgent problem. But he says the problem is deeper than that.
Given the housing crisis that's been allowed to emerge, going to motels that have surplus capacity is actually a fairly sensible solution. But of course, because the government has been so poor at solving the problem over a long period of time, you do end up with solutions that work on a short time frame, such as motels.
Paula Bennett said in June they wanted the system up and running that month. However, 3 months on, there's been no word as to whether anything's happened. For Checkpoint, call Alex Ashton, TNA.
Lots of issues raised in that story by Alex. A few minutes before we went to air, the Ministry of Social Development, who turned down an interview, sent through a statement. Its General Manager of Housing Contracts, Kelvin Moffat, says Colliers had the commercial expertise needed to find new emergency housing spaces. He says the company has the networks and local knowledge to help MSD find people emergency housing. Mr Moffat says the report will be used in MSD's ongoing policy work. So that was what we got from the Ministry. The Office of the Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, has also been in touch with Checkpoint to say it was her who rejected the warehouses and tents, not the ministry itself. That from the Minister, Paula Bennett. The time is coming up to 16 minutes to 6. More people than ever before are in favour of legalising or decriminalising cannabis, but the Prime Minister is ruling out any law changes. A survey of just over 1,000 people released by the New Zealand Drug Foundation today found 80% of people think cannabis should be decriminalised for pain relief or terminal illness. Over 60% think possessing a small amount of cannabis for personal use should be either legal or decriminalised. A previous poll showed a 50-50 split. But despite an increase in public support, the Prime Minister is refusing to budge. Sally Murphy got a public reaction.
I'm not really surprised by that figure. I think it was always going to be like that, yeah. I think New Zealanders now are pretty informed.
I noticed when I walked around there were a couple of people smoking it, so they're smoking it out in public. So, yeah, no, I'm not surprised.
It's the young ones, I think, of parents smoke it, they'll get into it as kids. I think it's a judgment that has to be made on medical grounds.
Cannabis being legalised for medical purposes is fine, except that once it becomes addicting, where do we go from there?
It's been proven that it does help people with certain afflictions or whatnot, yeah. So why don't you want to support something that helps people?
Comparing the latest Drug Foundation results to the previous survey, it seems public perception of cannabis use is changing. But Prime Minister John Key told Morning Report if the government legalises cannabis, it sends a message that increased drug use is okay.
In the end, you'll have a shop, just like you had a legal high shop. It won't be very long before you'll have communities who are on the station saying, hey, at 9 o'clock in the morning, all of these people gather around. This is not the message we want for our young people.
But in terms of legalisation or decriminalisation, it's a flat no from you, is it?
Well, I'm not a massive fan of it, I've got to say, no.
The Labour Party supports legalising the drug for medicinal use, but leader Andrew Little agrees with the Prime Minister that general decriminalisation would open the floodgates.
The scientific and medical evidence I've seen says that most of the cannabis available in New Zealand has high THC content, and for developing brains that poses health risks, and finding a formula for decriminalisation that means you can mitigate those health risks would be extraordinarily difficult.
Otago University Associate Professor Joseph Bowden researches the psychosocial causes and consequences of substance use. He supports legalising the drug and says the survey results are not surprising.
There's been a lot more coverage of the fact that the harms of cannabis, as we come to understand them a bit better, aren't really a lot greater, or in fact aren't any greater than the harms of alcohol.
Mr Bowden says if the law changes, there needs to be checks and balances in place to limit the supply to younger people.
There are harms around driving, there are harms around the fact that if you use cannabis, you're more likely to use other more dangerous illicit drugs. You're more prone to depression, underachievement in school. But again, these are all pretty mild, pretty small effects, and they're worse if you start using younger.
Mr Bowden says it is disappointing that New Zealand is lagging behind on reform. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
The Morgan Foundation has accused New Zealand Steel, Fonterra, Z Energy, Genesis Energy and Contact Energy of buying cheap overseas emission units which had no environmental integrity to offset their pollution as part of the government's emissions trading scheme. The Morgan Foundation has come out with a list they're calling the Dirty Dozen, but as Kate Gudsell reports, the companies on it say they've done nothing illegal.
Until last year, New Zealand companies could buy what's known as emission reduction units, or ERUs. These units were issued by countries that had developed projects which reduced pollution. The idea being that companies could buy them to offset their own emissions. But some countries like the Ukraine and Russia issued cheap units that didn't come from a genuine pollution mitigation. Translation, that made the units much cheaper, but they didn't actually represent reduced greenhouse gases. The Morgan Foundation's Jeff Simmons says that makes the units dodgy.
That has really hurt our international reputation. We have to put our hand up and make good for that. And whether that comes from the government or businesses, it doesn't really matter as long as someone actually puts their hand up and takes responsibility.
In a new report, the Morgan Foundation lists the top 12 companies, which it says were the biggest buyers of these units. exporters like Fonterra and New Zealand Steel received additional units for free from the government. Jeff Simmons believes they banked the more valuable free units they received and used the cheap, suspect ones to pay for their pollution. He also questions whether New Zealand Steel made a profit from trading the New Zealand units.
NZ Steel really need to come clean on what they've done with those units, whether they've sold them or whether they're keeping them there to use on a rainy day. If they're keeping them, then they have enough to cover their carbon emission units for years to come, which is kind of ironic when you think about how much whinging NZ Steel does about the emissions trading scheme. It's the fact that they've hugely profited from it.
RNZ News put this to New Zealand Steel and asked it to explain its $4.4 million income from its carbon permits outlined in its director's report last year. In a two-line response, New Zealand Steel says it fully complies with government policy and regulations, and it only comments on financials reported in its annual accounts. Petrol companies BP and Z Energy were in the top 3 of the Dirty Dozen list. Z spokesperson Jonathan Hill says the company did nothing wrong.
Within the rules, we opted to purchase the cheapest emissions units that we could, given that the cost of those units is effectively passed on to customers and we have to deliver the lowest cost to customers that we can.
However, fellow petrol company Mobil isn't on the list because it has a global policy that guides the purchase of its units. Jeff Simmons says that negates the argument by Z and others that they'd need to put prices up if they didn't buy the cheaper units. I put that to Jonathan Hill.
I have no idea why any competitor made decisions to buy the units that they did. All I know is that we opted to buy the cheapest units that we could within the rules of the scheme, and that's what we did.
Jonathan Hill says Z would like to see the emissions trading scheme tightened up, but doesn't think companies or the government should retrospectively pay for the pollution. Catherine Lining, a policy fellow at Research Institute Motu, worked on the original design of the ETS. She says the situation has come about because the government and companies followed the rules of an international agreement with weak targets.
The firms that took the high road should be applauded, but there are really no grounds to punish those who did otherwise but complied with the rules of the time. And I suspect that even more firms would like to do the right thing by the climate, but they're competing on price. So I think what this report highlights is that this is exactly why we need a functional ETS.
Catherine Lining says government policy needs to provide the firms with greater certainty so they have an incentive to invest in reducing their future pollution. For Checkpoint, ko Kate Gutsel Tene.
Questions are being asked about the level of oversight the Canterbury Regional Council has of a subsidised taxi scheme. This follows news it may have been ripped off by cab drivers to the tune of somewhere in the region of $420,000. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter Conan Young.
The suspected fraud involves the Total Mobility Scheme, where the elderly and disabled receive half-price taxi fares through a subsidy from councils and the government. The Canterbury Regional Council, ECAN, says drivers from 3 of the 4 companies delivering the service may have been charging for trips that didn't happen. Its chief executive, Bill Bayfield, declined to be interviewed, but released a statement indicating the potential fraud was identified during a forensic examination of its accounts.
We're taking this very seriously and have alerted the police so they can decide if any further action needs to be taken. We've met with the police and the Serious Fraud Office and sent them both the forensic accountant's report. We've also asked the taxi companies involved for an explanation of each non-matched trip identified. Once we've received those responses, we'll decide whether to bring a claim against them.
In the statement, Bill Bayfield says since the end of last year when it discovered the problem, ECAN has been refusing to pay drivers until it sees the GPS data confirming a trip has actually taken place.
We'd like to stress that no individual user of the scheme has paid more than they should have. However, this is not a victimless act, as Environment Canterbury may have paid money it shouldn't have. Likewise, it's also unfair to those taxi drivers who are doing their job properly, as the majority are.
The council has only checked its records for last year, and it's unclear how long the possible fraud may have been going on for and how much money is involved. It seems to be connected to passengers leaving their smart cards with cab drivers, providing them with ample opportunity to use them without the owners being present. 2 of the taxi companies at the centre of the claims did not return calls. A spokesperson for a 3rd company said its manager was on holiday and staff had been told not to talk to the media. The only taxi company in the scheme that is not caught up in the allegations is Driving Miss Daisy. A former regional councillor and candidate at this year's elections, Rick Tyndall, says it's not the first time ECAN's level of oversight has been called into question.
It really is a strong echo of a fault with the MetroCard system earlier, and also with the water consent monitoring that's happening this year for how technically capable the council is. And obviously public vigilance is required to make sure that technical standards at ECAN are maintained.
Rick Tyndall expects the level of scrutiny will improve when the 7 government-appointed commissioners are replaced with elected councillors at this year's elections.
The amount of effort that can be put in by 7 people as opposed to a full complement of councillors, twice that number of people will have twice the level of scrutiny applied to every aspect of ECAN work.
The suspected rort has been handed to the police, however taxi drivers have yet to be interviewed. The Greater Wellington Regional Council uses the same system as Canterbury and has been informed of the allegations. A spokesperson for that council says it's not aware of any fraudulent activity by taxi drivers in Wellington. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Perhaps one of the impressions of New Zealand's Olympic Games so far is a sense of hopes not being, well, quite realised, of some people not matching World Championship form, for example, or pre-Games seedings, but not Dylan Schmidt. One of the least well-known names in New Zealand's Olympic team, the 19-year-old trampolinist made the Olympic final and finished 7th. He was the youngest finalist competing, New Zealand's first ever Olympic trampolinist, and he ended his Games with a personal best. Not a medal, but something magic nonetheless.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Everything went pretty fast down on the floor, so straight into competing, and then after I competed, just kind of watching those scores, and once I realised I was in the final, it just kind of like march back into the final. It didn't really get much time to process it, but yeah, no, it was an amazing feeling.
Yeah, so you were in the final, you march out and do it. Is that an out-of-body experience? Are you taking it all in, or are you utterly immersed in your routine?
Yeah, pretty far to say. Once I start my routine, there's not a lot I think about other than doing the routine. So it's really just me and the tramp. And then once it's all over, it's kind of like you kind of realise where you are, and you look around, and there's a stadium full of people cheering. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Dylan, you've just been an Olympic finalist. You are the 7th best in the world in your sport. You started trampolining at the age of 5, and for much of that time, every time you travelled, every time you participated, every time you competed or trained, your family were paying for that. You truly were, for almost all that time really, a pay-for-yourself amateur. Yeah,
it's been pretty tough on our family. We've had to sacrifice quite a bit to get me places, and the last 2 years have been great. After my first World Championships, I got a pretty good result, so it kind of got the ball rolling with some funding, and the funding's kind of coming in now, and it's all kind of coming together. But yeah, the first kind of all my junior career was pretty much self-funded, and a few donations here and there. But it was pretty tough. But I'm obviously just really happy that I stuck with it, and my family supported me through the whole journey, and it's all kind of coming together now, which is nice.
Yeah, I think we forget that. The events that exist outside the mainstream funding streams, the would-be Olympians still being funded by the bank of mum and dad.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of my dad's income went to funding trips and that sort of stuff, so they put a lot of time and effort into, fundraising as well, through various sorts of stuff. And actually used to live in Waihi, so my mum and dad, they would drive us up to Auckland several times a week to train, and that was a huge sacrifice for time for them, and just for them to do that when we're not even that good at the sport was pretty crazy. And to look where we finally are now, I think they're pretty happy that they did it. So yeah, they've definitely given up quite a bit, and truly appreciate what they've done.
Dylan Schmidt, Olympic finalist. Parents of some of Nigeria's missing schoolgirls have described their anguish over watching a video from Boko Haram showing about 50 girls with a gunman who demands the release of fighters. Boko Haram is believed to be holding more than 200 of the 276 girls it took from their school in April 2014. Here's Diane Hodges from Reuters.
This video was posted on social media by the group Boko Haram. It appears to show recent footage of dozens of schoolgirls who were kidnapped 2 years ago from the Chibok school in Nigeria. One of the girls calls on the government to release jailed members of Boko Haram and to end airstrikes against the group's camps. The girl's father, Yakubu Kabo, says it was a great relief to see his daughter again.
Since the adopters of those girls, I didn't show my girl in those videos, past videos that has been passed. But when I saw her, I really am very happy. I can be able to sleep today.
Some 270 girls were abducted from the school. More than 200 are still missing. A group called Bring Back Our Girls stages a daily protest in Abuja, calling on the government to do more to find them. Member Buki Shonabare says the latest video provides fuel for their demands.
It is a confirmation that a lot of the Chibok girls are alive and that they are not dead, as has been presumed, in order for us to be able to sweep it under the carpet.
Nigeria's president has vowed to rescue the girls. The families at the protest are determined to make sure he does everything possible to fulfill that promise.
Some feedback on Alex's story about Collier's and its report. We, the hard-pressed taxpayer, paid a real estate agent to produce a report suggesting that the homeless be housed in tents and warehouses. What? Because the homeless are too stupid to have thought of that themselves. Perhaps Collier's should go and have a walk around some parts of Auckland to see what's actually happening under their noses. Dicks, says Donna. Not sure if you can say dicks on national radio. Although I suspect I just did. Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thank you for your feedback. We do appreciate receiving it. If you want to text us, it's 2101. If you want to email, it's checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up in the next half hour, anger mounts in Havelock North over the town's contaminated water. Auckland's unitary plan is finally sealed. And, well, will it be delivered? And Lisa Carrington on her quest for double gold. All of that and more coming up. But first, RNZ News with Sharon Brett-Kelly.
Kia ora, good evening. The water contamination crisis in Havelock North and Hawke's Bay continues to escalate, with all schools in the town now shut for the next 2 days. Up to 2,000 people have fallen sick after the town's water supply was infected with Campylobacter bacteria. Peter Fowler reports.
Hastings District Council says presentations of seriously ill people to accident and medical centres continues to increase. Havelock North High School Principal Greg Fenton says the decision to close the schools was made at a crisis meeting with primary, intermediate and high school principals in the Ministry of Education this afternoon. A quarter to a half of students have called in sick at some schools. Doctors' surgeries in Havelock North say they're under siege, with many more people asking for appointments than they have available. Health authorities say residents should continue to boil their water for the next few days before drinking it. In Havelock North, this is Peter Fowler.
Legislation giving the country's spy agencies an explicit mandate to spy on New Zealanders has been introduced to Parliament. The proposed bill would govern both the Government Communications Security Bureau and the Security Intelligence Service. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
An independent review earlier this year found the restrictions preventing the GCSB from intercepting the private communications of New Zealanders was confusing. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says it's the most significant reform to the agency's legislation in the country's history. He says it clearly sets out the agency's powers and oversight and establishes a new warranting regime. Mr Key says warrants to spy on New Zealanders would have to be signed off by the Attorney-General and a Commissioner of Intelligence warrants. The bill will have its first reading in Parliament on Thursday. From Parliament, Demelza Leslie.
The plan, which ushers in more higher density housing across Auckland, is now complete. The Auckland Council has signed off the unitary plan, which rezones much of the city to accommodate more than 400,000 additional homes by 2040. It's been nearly 5 years in the making, and its most contentious aspect has been zoning more of the urban area for higher density 2- or 3-storey homes. The Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse, who has led the process, says the city now needs to get stuck into the reality of what the plan allows to happen.
This is part of us handing this tool over to developers and the community of Auckland, saying we've made some big changes into the way that you can plan and develop Auckland, take up the challenge and make it happen, and above all else, build affordable houses so that we can house our Aucklanders.
Auckland's Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse. More than 20,000 people have been rescued across southern areas of the American state of Louisiana after what has been described as unprecedented flooding of epic proportions. The capital city of Baton Rouge is the worst affected. At least 5 people have died and up to 10,000 are in evacuation centres. The Chief Administrative Officer for Baton Rouge, William Daniel, says hundreds of homes have been flooded and many people remain stranded.
It is definitely an unprecedented flood here in Baton Rouge. Houses that have never, ever even come close to flooding or have water 3 and 4 feet high into the houses.
William Daniel says more rain is expected across the region. President Barack Obama has issued a federal disaster declaration in 4 counties. The union, representing thousands of school support staff, says it's running a campaign to raise awareness of how poorly paid they are. The Educational Institute, which represents almost 10,000 support staff in primary and secondary schools, says schools are struggling to make ends meet because of negligible increases to operations grants. It says office workers, teachers, aides and technicians already suffer from poor pay and precarious hours of employment, and the freeze will only put them under greater threat. The union's National Secretary, Paul Golter, says funding increases are only tied to roll growth and don't address the crucial issue of low wages.
One estimate has over 40% of them actually earn below the living wage, right down next to the minimum wage. These guys have got nothing to come and go on. I think parents would be appalled to know that the teacher aides, for example, who are looking after kids with the most special education needs, are getting paid near the minimum wage.
NZEI's Paul Golter. A man found dead in a service lane in Thames overnight has been identified. The police say he is a 36-year-old local man, but his name isn't expected to be released today. He was found in a service lane between Mary and Queen Streets about 7 this morning. His death is being treated as unexplained at this stage, and the lane remains closed. The police say they would particularly like to hear about any suspicious or odd sightings and noises from the service lane or nearby town area between 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon and 7 this morning. To sport, the Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt made history in Rio this afternoon by winning his 3rd consecutive Olympic gold in the 100-metre sprint at Rio. Bolt ran a season's best time of 9.81 seconds to beat American Justin Gatlin by 0.08 of a second. Members of the New Zealand men's hockey team say they're devastated by their 3-2 quarter-final loss to Germany this afternoon. The Black Sticks were leading 2-0 heading into the final quarter, but Germany scored 3 goals in the final 5 minutes to snatch the win. New Zealand's world champion kayaker Lisa Carrington says she's trying not to think about her status as the hot favourite to win gold. Carrington begins her Olympic campaign overnight in the K1 200 heats, with British bookmakers having her at odds of 1-33 to defend her title. She says it does add some pressure.
At the end of the day, you kind of got to not worry about the odds and whatever the performance is on the day, and that's a scary thing to want to achieve, is the best performance on the day, and I hope I can do that.
Lisa Carrington. And 1,500-metre runner Nick Willis has arrived in Rio ahead of his 4th Olympics. He'll race against compatriots Julian Matthews and Hamish Carson in the event, with the trio training together over the past month. Matthews and Carson landed a few days ago, and Matthews says it's nice to have Willis join them again.
He's really the glue that holds our team together, and it is a team. It's kind of weird, it's not a common thing in our sport. But yeah, we had a nice session this morning. Did a couple of 200s with Nick, and it makes you feel good if you can hang on to the back of him, so it gives you a lot of confidence for sure.
Julian Matthews, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Northland's Dean Bajent Mercer, the meat in the sandwich between conservation and iwi aspirations for economic development. He wouldn't want it any other way. Our window on the world asks whether our human bias is leading to the survival of the cutest when it comes to natural selection. Well, our botanist, Beck Stanley, fills us in on the conversations plants have with each other. On Nights, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, cloudy periods, a few showers north of Whangarei, becoming isolated and confined to the east coast overnight. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, fine apart from a few cloudy periods. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with a few showers developing north of Wairoa. Wellington and Wairarapa, cloud increasing overnight with the odd shower possible. Cloud clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Nelson, mainly fine, however rain in the west clearing tonight. Buller to Fiordland, remaining areas of rain clearing this evening or overnight and becoming fine everywhere. Drizzle developing in Fiordland around midday tomorrow. Marlborough to Otago, but excluding Clutha, fine weather. Southland and Clutha, cloudy periods with a few showers today. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, isolated showers, clearing tomorrow morning. This is Checkpoint and it's 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed. Sharon, we're going to go back to Havelock North and the water and the Campbell-Bacta very shortly. We did a lot on it after 5 o'clock. We're going to talk to the Medical Officer of Health and get the latest from there. But first, the seemingly never-ending story is finally over, is it? Well, Auckland's unitary plan has been signed off, setting a path for the future development of the city. Council's wrapped up 4 days of debating a final version of the plan, which has been nearly 5 years in the making and has been its single biggest task since amalgamation. Its most crucial aspect is zoning much of the urban area for higher density housing, making room for 422,000 new dwellings by 2040, which is 24 years away. The plan's been finished 4 days before a government-imposed deadline. Minutes after the job was done, our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall spoke with the Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse, who's led the process, and asked how she felt.
I think it's been a marathon, but I feel that we've come out with a good plan and a plan that's going to be worthy of Auckland.
Were there moments where you thought you wouldn't get there?
It's been a rocky ride. I mean, it would be dishonest not to say that we've gone to some pretty challenging places over the last 5 years, but that's good democracy. You know, we've been challenged by our community, we've been challenged politically, we've been challenged by a variety of groups around Auckland, and we've endeavoured to find a good landing place through the middle.
Is there a bunch of minutes that you'll remember above all else?
I have to say probably the public meeting in St Heliers I still bear the scars from. But, to their credit, most of our community over the last couple of years in particular have worked through the issues and understand that Auckland needs to change and they need to be part of that new Auckland.
How perfect is the outcome?
You know, there's, as we all said in there's some bits that people might not be happy with. There are some bits that may need to be changed and that may need to evolve. But the bulk of the plan sits together coherently as a good plan that gives effect to the Auckland plan, which is what Auckland has told us they wanted.
So the plan's done. What's next in making it happen?
Now we need to get stuck into the reality of what the plan allows to happen in Auckland. And this is part of us handing this tool over to developers and the community of Auckland, saying we've made some big changes into the way that you can plan and develop Auckland, take up the challenge and make it happen.
Penny Hulse talking to Todd Niall. Medical centres in Havelock North say they're under siege basically, and schools have been closed for the next 2 days as the water contamination crisis escalates in the Hawke's Bay town. Between 1,000 and 2,000 people have fallen sick after Havelock North's water supply was infected with Campylobacter bacteria. The Prime Minister John Campbell says the Hastings District Council will hold an independent inquiry into the water, how it was contaminated, and says the government may hold its own inquiry. Our reporter Peter Fowler is in Havelock North where there's mounting anger among residents who are demanding to know why they weren't told about the problem earlier.
Normally the streets of Havelock North are bustling with people going to work and school, but this morning it resembled a ghost town. Half of Havelock North High School's 900 students were sick today, and Principal Greg Fenton says many more students came to school but went home sick. He says the decision to close all the schools for 2 days from tomorrow was made at a crisis meeting with primary, intermediate and high school principals and the Ministry of Education this afternoon.
This is pretty unique. I've never come across anything like this before.
When did you start noticing things were not quite right?
Friday really was the first evidence that there were the large numbers of students away. We ended up with 179 away on Friday.
Parents who did drop their children off at school this morning were angry they hadn't been warned earlier about the contaminated water.
What has really concerned me has been the communications from the council. We had no communications until later on Friday night. That was the first I heard of it, when apparently they knew about it earlier on Friday morning. So we could have stopped our children from drinking the water, stopped elderly from drinking the water. My little baby, she was quite sick over the weekend, and it's a real concern as a parent as to why we weren't communicated with the information earlier.
We should have been told early, and apparently they knew earlier than we've been told. And they say, I heard this morning on the news you can drink the water again. Who would drink the water?
My neighbour across the road, I suddenly saw the elderly, they're over 80, I saw their curtains were still closed on Saturday morning at 10, so I rang them up, and David was very ill, had lost 3.5 kilos, and they had no idea about the water situation until I told them. I think the council has been very remiss about not advising the population earlier.
Hastings District Mayor Lawrence Yule says he was told about the contamination about 3:30 on Friday afternoon, and the decision was made then to chlorinate the water. He says there was a suspicious water test about 5 hours earlier, but the council had to make sure before it took action. Mr Yule says the District Health Board was aware earlier that residents were getting sick, but it took time to link that to the water supply. The manager of Denton Peak Pharmacy in Havelock North, Robin Wood, says doctors rang her on Sunday to open up to provide fluid replacement products.
Yes, this was a very bad outbreak. Yes, nothing that I've seen before in my career, so we were very, very busy.
The Hastings District Council, meantime, is advising Havelock North residents to keep boiling their water for the next few days before drinking it. It expects the number of sick people to peak tomorrow at the earliest. Schools, meanwhile, will reassess on Wednesday whether they reopen their doors to students on Thursday. In Havelock North for Checkpoint, this is Peter Fowler.
Thousands of school office workers, teacher aides, technicians and caretakers face reduced hours and pay cuts unless the government boosts school funding. That's the warning from the union representing almost 10,000 support staff in primary and secondary schools, which says schools are struggling to make ends meet because of negligible increases to schools' operating grants. But the Education Ministry rejects the union's figures, saying funding has actually increased for schools that need it. Catherine Hutton has been looking at this.
8-year-old Abacus Catan attends Wellington's Ofero Bay School. She has Down syndrome, and her mother, Danielle Davies, says Abacus would be lost were it not for the help she receives from a teacher aide for 11 hours a week.
She wouldn't be able to progress. She would be in a class and I imagine not joining in socially, so those social bonds wouldn't be established as they are. All those things like reading and writing and maths, all those things that are going to contribute to her as an adult when she's older, to being part of the community and participating, I don't even know where it would be. I fear that maybe she wouldn't have those skills at the level that she would be now. In fact, I'm very sure she wouldn't.
The Educational Institute says office workers, teachers' aides and technicians suffer from poor pay and precarious hours of employment, and funding increases that are only tied to school roll growth will just worsen their situation. Its National Secretary Paul Golter says that's why the union has launched a campaign to try to reverse what it describes as a freeze to schools' operation grants.
One estimate has over 40% of them actually earn below the living wage, right down next to the minimum wage. These guys have got nothing to come and go on. I think parents would be appalled to know that the teacher aides, for example, who are looking after kids with the most special education needs are getting paid near the minimum wage.
The NZEI says research conducted by the consultancy firm Infometrics shows school funding will effectively be cut by nearly 1% next year once inflation is factored in. But the ministry rejects the report's findings. It says it's targeting funding at high-risk students, but averaged out, it would equate to a 1% operations grant increase. And it says it's also boosting the funding used to hire teacher aides for children with special needs. Wellington's Berempore School employs about a dozen teacher aides who work with 30 to 40 special needs students at any one time. Its principal, Mark Potter, says schools have been forced to dip into their operational budgets because they just haven't got enough funding to cover that cost.
We do get some funding from ORS, we get some funding from the HLE and the high learning needs, but we still have significant numbers of children coming in that don't qualify by criteria for those funding streams. So it's extremely difficult to provide the funding for teacher aides. And even then, it's given on a peppercorn approach. You get a little bit here and there, but it's not consistent.
people will now have the chance to have their say with an online petition calling on the Education Minister, Hekia Parata, to reverse the funding freeze. For Checkpoint, ko Catherine Hutton, tēnei.
Wellington's mayoral candidates are backpedalling on whether the city should stump up to $90 million for a runway extension. This comes after the Board of Airline Representatives released a report by the Sydney-based consulting company, Alevon, which has found the airport's passenger forecasts are wrong and none of the proposed extra flights are commercially viable. Wellington Airport itself is dismissing that, saying it stands by its own analysis. Our local government reporter Michael Kropp has been speaking to mayoral candidates for their view.
Outgoing Porirua Mayor Nick Leggett says it doesn't change the case yet, but the city should take its time to consider the business case after resource consent is granted, even if that means a couple of years' delay for the project.
This is not about shutting the door today on what could be a hugely important connector for the Wellington region. It's about carefully proceeding and understanding the fors and the againsts, the costs, the benefits, and where this fits in an overall strategy for Wellington and the region.
The self-proclaimed non-establishment candidate Keith Johnson says if it were viable, the airport would fund it itself.
There's absolutely no justification whatsoever for this subsidisation of private profit. It's the whole idea is a nonsense. It's just the chickens coming home to roost.
Wellington Airport won't disclose its contribution, saying it's still waiting for the resource consent to come through. But Nicola Young says Infratil, the airport's two-thirds owner, needs to pay in line with its ownership. Fellow councillor Joe Coughlin is pro-infrastructure, particularly roads, but says it's too soon to make a decision.
We haven't actually seen the final business case for the runway extension, so no doubt there will be a number of reports that will be pro and anti through this process, and I think we just have to wait until we've seen the final business case, which will be no doubt available after the resource consent process, and then we'll be making a decision.
Helen Ritchie says the money could be better spent elsewhere. Deputy Mayor Justin Lester says the Board of Airline Representatives has been consistent in its opposition, and it's commissioned a report to back that up.
If you pay a consultant to do a job, they will get the information potentially on two different sides of a coin. These numbers are real. It's a question of how you interpret them. I hope that we will work with government, with them as a potential funder of the project, and we may then decide to do some joint reports.
Andy Foster says he would set up an investment vehicle which would own the extension rather than the airport. That would guarantee only long-haul flights would pay to use the new tarmac, and there would be no transfer of public money to a private company. And on the streets, it's clear the debate's still got a long way to go.
At the end of the day, it's commercial reality. There's no point in flying empty planes out of Wellington to Hong Kong.
No, I think it'll still be a great benefit to Wellington if we have greater access to other airports around the world. We don't have to fly to Auckland first or to Christchurch to start a long journey.
Probably $300 million that could be invested elsewhere in Wellington.
Christchurch has the runway that can handle those bigger planes, but they have difficulties attracting some airlines. So just because we have a longer runway doesn't mean that the airlines will come.
The Greater Wellington Regional Council says it's received about 780 submissions, which will be considered by the Environment Court through the resource consent process. In Wellington, ko Michael Kropp tēnei.
It's 22 minutes past 6. Canoe sprinter Lisa Carrington begins her Olympic campaign tomorrow morning as she seeks to cement her place as the world's most dominant female paddler. She's chasing 2 gold medals in Rio. She's defending the K1 200 title she won in London, and she's also competing in the K1 500. She didn't race the 500 at the last Olympics, though she is current world champion. She really is remarkable. Carrington spoke to Gail Woods in Rio on the eve of her quest for double gold, and she concedes being a searing hot favourite does add to the pressure.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, but I mean that's what this is about. I think if we shied away from the pressure, then we wouldn't get such great performances. So yeah.
Do you look at people like Bond and Murray and see their incredible unbroken winning streak, and take inspiration from that?
Yeah, I mean they're incredible athletes, and I mean that's amazing at what they do, and yeah, it's great to see that they are so strong, and yeah, getting that inspiration that, you know, I guess it being a New Zealander as well, it's kind of it's nice to know that something that what they do is achievable for us all. Yeah.
You're, according to the odds, you know, you are so much odds on favourite, it's not funny to win in the 200. Does that add pressure?
Yeah, I think, but I think it's at the end of the day, you kind of got to not worry about the odds and whatever the performance is on the day, and I think that's a scary thing to want to achieve, is the best performance on the day, and I hope I can do that. Yeah.
With the 500, are you doing that as sort of is that a bit of a cushion if you don't do so well in the 200, or is that not
Absolutely
really the way
not.
of thinking?
No way. It's just another challenge. It's a really tough event. It's got huge history in our sport, and the girls. I mean, my competition. We're all. It's tough. So that's something that that I want to get amongst.
What do you get from the competition? I mean, how do they regard you? Definitely someone to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I think with my past achievements, it would be awesome for them to get one over me. But yeah, I think it is good to have that competition, and I really respect them. So I really enjoy racing girls that I respect. So yeah.
How different is this from London?
Second Olympics. I guess I've got more experience. I mean, London. It's much more familiar, being almost like New Zealand, so that type of thing, and that's what's familiar. And coming to Rio, very unfamiliar. I haven't spent much time here. The course is interesting. It's not a proper course as such, but and the wind is quite variable, so having those things just adds some more challenges to that.
When you say it's not a proper course, what do you mean by that?
It's not a man-made course, yeah. So, I mean, it's, it fits well. They've got great lane ropes and starting gates, and everything's all well done. It's just that the man-made courses are just a little bit, a bit easier because we don't have as much variable conditions, whereas here the wind is very variable, so that does make it more challenging. But, I mean, that's what it's about. It's about the challenge.
Lisa Carrington speaking to our reporter in Rio, Gail Woods. It's 6:25. Let's go back to Havelock North. It's water contamination, Campylobacter. An emergency briefing has been held about that this afternoon. The Hawke's Bay Public Medical Officer of Health, Dr Nick Jones, was there. And Dr Jones joins us on the phone now. Welcome to Checkpoint. Between 1,000 and 2,000 people sick, the Mayor said earlier on the program. Is that the number you're working with?
Hi, John. It's Nick Jones here. You may recall me from Wellington. Good to talk. So the number we are looking at, it's a constantly fluctuating situation at the moment, so we don't have any definite numbers. What I can do is run through the numbers that we do know about, and then we can talk about the what we think the totals might be. So we've got 2 still in ICU who are still very unwell. We've got 22 patients admitted to hospital. 23 came into emergency department today. We've had 63 through in total. We've had 210 through GPs today, about 400 since Friday. We've got about 105 people in various age residential care facilities who are sick. 200 calls to Healthline. And the schools went back today, but the numbers there were way down. So we're looking at, excuse me a sec, guys, just on the phone here. So we're looking at, I think, in Havelock schools, it looked like more than 1,700 children away, between 50% and probably 75% of the roles.
Gosh, they're big numbers. And the ICU, the 2 in ICU, they are obviously seriously unwell, are they? Obviously they are. They wouldn't be in ICU. What is the nature of their illness? Is that can you give us, for example, a sense of their age? Are they elderly or young, very young?
We don't like giving too much details about patients, John. I mean, normally the information we give is that they're, the condition they're in, and they are in a critical condition. I mean, it's probably, I think I could probably say it's fair to say that they're older people.
Okay. In terms of, you've admitted 23 people, so they're sick enough to be admitted, not simply sent back to their GP or treated in outpatients. What are you treating people with when they are unwell enough to require some kind of medical response? What are you using?
So the ones who are getting admitted are tending to be older people. We haven't had a lot of children admitted. The GPs have been doing a fantastic job, actually, triaging and seeing people in the community and keeping them managing at home. So the ones who are coming through to us are really people who've, been either got hit really hard and got dehydrated really quickly. They can get, some of them had complications around the kidneys, because of the dehydration. And the very severe end of the spectrum, I know that the docs are treating them with antibiotics, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of benefit in antibiotics, so we're not recommending that for most people out in the community.
But at the severe end of the spectrum, are they making some difference?
Look, I'm probably not the right person to talk about that. I'm your public health guy, not your infectious disease specialist, but my understanding is that it could reduce the duration of illness by a day. It's not...
In terms of the bigger issues around public health, is the water, are you guys now saying, are you satisfied that the water is safe to drink there now?
Look, what's happened since the decision on Friday to chlorinate and to boil water is that there should be no way for any pathogenic organism to be in that water. I mean, after it's been boiled and chlorinated, it's absolutely safe.
Okay, so the damage has been done, but as far as you're aware, it's not still being done, at least not by the water.
Yeah, so, and the other thing, of course, to keep in mind is that all the tests we've got coming back are all showing that it's Campylobacter, and we know that the chlorine is dealing with that.
Okay. Dr. Nick Jones, lovely to talk to you again. Hawke's Bay Public Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Nick Jones, ending Checkpoint tonight, joining us live on the phone. Thank you for being with us, everyone. We will be back, of course, tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. The Hastings District Mayor Lawrence Ewell has publicly apologised for the gastro illness in Havelock North, telling Checkpoint the Campylobacter infection is the largest waterborne outbreak in New Zealand history. Legislation giving the country's spy agencies an explicit mandate to spy on New Zealanders has been introduced to Parliament. The plan, ushering in more higher density housing across Auckland, is now complete. And Usain Bolt has confirmed his status as the fastest man in the world, storming to victory in the 100 metres men's final in Rio. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Every weekday lunchtime, RNZ National presents in-depth coverage of international news and issues.
I will always do what is correct, whether the individual concerned is an ordinary citizen or a sitting president.
Not just the headlines, but full reporting of the most important overseas stories of the day from correspondents on the ground as world news